there's two different things. One is the Renaissance souls and how they tackle the challenges they face, like how do they organize their time, how do they deal with too many different interests, how do they figure out of all those ice cream flavors up on the board which ones they want to eat. And that's an issue that they face at any stage of their life. One of the 20-minute talks I just did was for a group of kids thinking about college. So in a sense, that's something that's at any stage of a Renaissance soul's life. They face those challenges. And then we're looking at what are the challenges that we're facing as we're heading into retirement. And in fact, there's a great deal of overlap. If we put aside, as I said, I can't do the Medicare and that type of thing, but several of the challenges that Renaissance souls face are also challenges that we face and vice versa. So if you think about looking into retirement, one of the challenges that people will say is, oh my goodness, now I've finally got time to do all the things that I love. But there's 100 of them. How am I going to choose? What am I going to do? Where do I start? You know, we finally get the time that we've been craving, and it almost paralyzes us. It's so abundant. Or then there's the paradox of that is that, on the other hand, we can also say, I've got too much time on my hands. How am I going to fill it? You know, saying I want to travel and I want to see my grandchildren, I want to relax, is only going to take me a certain distance, and then what am I going to do? So some people come to it with, they have a zillion things they want to do but don't know how to choose. Other people come to it and are a little overwhelmed by the amount of time that's facing. Okay? Another contradiction that we face in retirement is that, especially if we've worked at a job that has a built-in structure, you know, 9 to 5 or that type of issues. On the one hand, suddenly having a day that's seemingly structureless, that every day seems to be like a weekend, only there isn't even church or synagogue or whatever, you know, just, there's that part where we crave structure. We need a little bit more structure to feel that we're getting something accomplished that we enjoy. On the other hand, we spent all of our working life being told what to do and when to do it. So the part of us, we want the structure, but we don't want to be told this is what you have to do and this is what you have to do, because we've been there, done that already. So that seems sort of paradoxical. And then there's also the final challenge that overlaps beautifully with Renaissance soul is, once you've retired, how do you answer that nefarious question, what do you do? If when you're working, oh, I'm at the community center, blah, 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 or I teach such and such, or I'm a plumber, and our identity has sort of been attached to the profession that we had. And suddenly we retire. I don't want to be like a woman that I ran into a Saturday at our, we have a farmer's market in Amherst every Saturday. And I hadn't seen Ann in years. And so whenever, Ann, it's one, what are you doing these days? Go, oh, not that much, you know, I'm retired, you know. Like it was sort of this deflated, because she didn't have a profession to label it with, she felt lost. Well, these are all things that Renaissance souls struggle with all the time. They struggle with having too many choices, they struggle with not knowing how to structure their time, they struggle with wanting to do what they feel like they want to do when their energy feels like it, and they struggle with what do you do when they keep changing all the time. So that said, what I'd like to do this evening is start the first part, talk about Renaissance souls, then talk about how those issues apply to those of us facing retirement, and finally leave time for questions and answers. Is that?
Yes.
Fit? Okay, good. All right, now here's where I'm going to take out my little cheat sheet just to make sure I include everything that I meant to include. Okay. First of all, to understand Renaissance souls, I'd like you to picture a continuum. At this end of the continuum, you have somebody like Mozart. Mozart knew what he wanted to do since he was 2 years old, and he did it until he died. At this end of the continuum, you have somebody like Ben Franklin. Now, if Ben Franklin were alive today and he did something like the Declaration of Independence, they'd immediately want to pin him down at JFK School of Government at Harvard. Then what's he doing out in the barn with the kite and the key routine? Oh, well, then he's supposed to be at MIT. Well, no, he wants to go to France, French language, French culture. Okay, Berlitz or UN. No. He wants to design a post office and invent bifocals and do Poor Richard's Almanac and study the tides. Okay, Two incredible geniuses. That's why we've heard of both of them hundreds of years after they were alive. But they're wired 180 degrees differently from each other. If they had made Ben Franklin go to Washington, D.C. to read the fine print on legislation for the next 40 years, he probably would have gone bonkers. If they'd given him one little magnifying glass to look at one particular electron for the rest of his life, we probably never would have heard of him. They're both wonderful. There's nothing wrong with either one of them, but they are different from each other. Okay, now, you would think that any culture would love both of them. And of course, if you take somebody at the genius level of a Ben Franklin and Mozart, yes, every culture loves both of them. But what happened in this country is that at the end of World War II, when U.S. business was finally top dog, England was flat, Europe was flat, Japan had been flattened, the management theory that the IBMs and General Motors bought into after the war was that the ideal employee would be, if it's a white-collar employee, at 20, generally speaking, he, at that point, should pick his major, and at 22, he should come to IBM as an accountant, as a project manager, and he should cradle to grave it. He should just keep moving up that one career ladder his entire life. And if it was the blue-collar guy at General Motors, it was turn the widget, maybe the fins will go up, maybe the fins will go down, but you turn the widget. When you're 55, we'll give you a watch and you can croak. Either way, the goal was, and the whole culture became, I mean, some of you look like me, you might even remember this, the man in the gray flannel suit, the organization man, the books, the movies, they were all about climbing that one ladder. And that's how you got to success, that's how you got to financial security, and there was no other way. And that spoke especially to the adults of that generation who lived through the Depression and had known such dramatic insecurity that they craved and they supported this concept of, yes, I'm going to do something, and if I have a job, by golly, I'm going to keep it, because I remember what happened when my father lost his. So, as a result of the fact that the ideal employees were people who were wired more like Mozart, all of the carrots, all of the compliments got dangled on that side of the continuum. We still hear, something like, President Clinton wanted to be president since he was 8, with the implicit thing, if you know what you want to do when you're 8, then you will rise to the top of the heap. The language got distorted. It was at that point that the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? It began to be assumed that it only had one answer. The books that came out on what color is your parachute? When I first learned this, I wouldn't name this book, what colors are your parachutes? But the whole implication was that there was just going to be one a singular thing, and even people who love you will say, oh honey, I just wish you'd figure out whatever it is and be happy. I'll support whatever it is. And they don't realize that that very it is going to be paralyzing, because Renaissance souls, people like Ben Franklin, don't have an it. Okay? Another thing that happened, in addition to the distortion of the language and the carrots being dangled over on the Mozart side, was that there weren't any role models. We're told Bill Clinton wanted to be president, as I said. That's a role model. Know what you want to do when you're 8 and get there. But nobody said to children, and unfortunately at this point nobody's still saying to young children, oh, you've got a lot of different interests. That's wonderful. You could grow up to be as rich and famous as so-and-so. How many people here know who Bill Moyers is? Okay. There isn't even a name for what that man does, really. And why is he so famous? Because he's interested in so many things. Myth with Joseph Campbell. The story of the song, Amazing Grace. I mean, he's all over the map, quote unquote, and that's why he's so successful. Would you trade bank accounts with him sight unseen? I certainly would. But if he's not held up as a model, we can't say, what do you mean you can only get rich or famous if you go up this ladder? This person. Or, an example I use that everybody knows, makes it simple, is Oprah. Now, if Oprah had been a movie actress, and she'd stayed a movie actress, she'd be richer than all of us. No question. Pardon?
She's stewardess.
Oh yeah, no, I know, but I'm saying she would be, but she wouldn't be the rich and powerful person. She'd be sitting around waiting for a white director to figure out whether he needed her. If she had been a regular talk show hostess, you know, sleaze makeover, she'd be richer than any of us. But as she would not be the billionaire powerhouse of entertainment that she is today. Now, what made her talk show so different from everybody else's was that Oprah has so many different interests. She loves to read, so she has her book club, and she believes in physical fitness and weight gain, and she believes in people helping each other, so she has the kindness chain and the Habitat for Humanity, and she believes in, she's fascinated by psychology and child development and interpersonal sociology. So she brings in the readers, and she brings in the runners, and she brings in the people who are interested in self-help, and before you know it, 30 million people are watching. But nobody says to the little kids who express a lot of interest, oh, it's wonderful, you could grow up to be as rich and famous as Oprah. Okay, now, what happens to that? How many of you here remember the ugly duckling story? You know, the swan's egg that gets left in the duck culture? That swan thought it was broken. You know, it saw these ducks, I don't know if this is biologically correct, so don't quote me, but my image is that, you know, the ducks eat their short little necks like this, and here's the swan with a long neck trying very hard to do what's expected, when in fact what he likes to do is go all the way down into something, get nourished, come up, look all around, and pick something else. And he doesn't know that he isn't an ugly duckling. He doesn't know that he isn't broken until he finally sees some other swans. So one of the things that happens is, for some Renaissance souls, and I say for some because there are three kinds. They're the culturally identified Renaissance souls. Every time you hear Maya Angelou referred to, somebody's going to say she's a Renaissance soul woman. People who are so phenomenally gifted at so many different things do get labeled or referred to as a Renaissance soul. Then there are the self-identified. They're people who've known all along that they keep changing their interests and they're totally fine with it. Although some of those people buy more copies of the book because they say, I'm so sick and tired of having to explain myself. I'm going to give this to my boss and my aunt and my mother and my son. They get annoyed that people don't understand them, but they respect themselves. But by and large, the largest number of people are non-identified Renaissance souls who still think that they are deserving of those negatives, the dilettante, the dabbler, jack of all trades, master of none. When are you going to settle down? You know, the implication being that you're not really a grown-up until you pick one thing and stick with it. And so there's a lot of self-doubt. If that's what you've been getting all your life, the implication, these people over here seem to have a key that you don't have. Then you may end up working below your level. I work with quite a few people very bright who are only a waitress or who are executive assistant or something, because then, in a way, they haven't chosen yet. They can still imply to them, well, don't worry, obviously I'm not going to be an executive assistant all the rest of my life, so yeah, I'm just doing this for now. And that's a way of not having to pin themselves down. Or they may be working out of their element, you know, using our swan image. How many people have seen a swan on land? Ungainly. I mean, you wouldn't remember it if you saw it. You certainly wouldn't write a glowing letter of reference for it or nominate it for a promotion. But when the swan gets in the water, when it gets in its element, everybody goes, oh! Well, many Renaissance souls are working out of their element. They're trying so hard to work like ducks that the end result is that they're not doing that well. They're like the duck, the swan that's on land. Okay? Another thing that can happen for Renaissance souls is that they keep doubting their own decisions. And the reason for this is the implication in our culture has been that for a decision to be the right one, it has to last. I'll give you a personal example. When I was applying to college, I didn't know anything about Renaissance souls back then. I just knew I was interested in everything. So I figured I would major in political science, and then I would minor in economics and history. That would cover the whole world. Anything could come under that. Well, at that point, Swarthmore didn't allow 2 minors, so I had to go through a whole rigmarole to get 2 minors. That didn't keep me, however, from the summer after my junior year working at a camp with blind children, and suddenly deciding that I really wanted to work one-on-one. I came back, I asked if I could drop one political science honors seminar for 2 education courses. The entire Swarthmore faculty had to meet to make a decision of such amazing precedence. And the implication in my own mind, as well as everybody else's, was political science had been a mistake. Even though I graduated magna cum laude on political science at a very hard school, I did not get that I had gotten from it what I wanted, and I had outgrown it. I felt like I'd made a mistake. Then I went into education. I couldn't decide between early childhood and special ed, so I did both. I taught at NYU Reading Institute, and I was a pioneer in Head Start. And again, when I outgrew that, I thought, oh, well, I guess that was a mistake. So what happens to a lot of Renaissance souls is they're afraid to use enthusiasm as a litmus test. People often say to you, just think about retiring, you've got all this time ahead of you. Well, what are you enthusiastic about doing? What are you interested in doing? And your reaction may well be, a Renaissance soul, I might say, don't come at me with that enthusiasm stuff. I was enthusiastic about political science, and it didn't last. And I was enthusiastic about education, and that didn't last. And and so we think that we can't trust it, because the definition of something being correct for us is that it had to have lasted, which for Renaissance souls is not the case. Okay, so, and the last thing that we do, in addition to questioning earlier decisions, is we keep looking for an it. I don't know how many Renaissance souls, the first clients I have, the first session they come to me, they love me to death because I have finally made them feel okay. I've told them about swans, I've showed them swans. And the next session, they are so pissed off because they had come to me really wanting me, I was the ace in the hole, to produce the it. Deep down, they're dying to be like the ducks. If you've been out of step, if your siblings are all doing it the right way, or both your parents are one career track doing it the right way, so often they will keep looking for that it, and therefore they don't settle anywhere because they think that they need to have a bolt of lightning or something come out of the sky. I don't know how many people say, I don't know if this is the right thing for me to be doing. I didn't feel, well, maybe when Bill Clinton walked down Hope, Arkansas at 8, maybe he did feel a bolt of lightning. I don't know. But Renaissance souls, we don't feel that because we're interested in too many things. Okay, so we're not ugly ducklings, and in fact, being a Renaissance soul is a positive personality trait. And the 3 key characteristics of Renaissance souls. The first one is our preference. We prefer variety and combination over concentrating on just one thing. Our second characteristic involves our process, and this has 2 parts to it. First, unlike the ducks who love to narrow their choices. I mean, if you think about academia, it's duck heaven. You start out with liberal arts, and you narrow it down to English, and you narrow it down to drama, and you narrow it down to tragedy, and you narrow it down to the Middle Age, and you narrow it down to Shakespeare, and you narrow it down to Romeo and Juliet, and you narrow it down to dialogue, and in the very first act, there's something tiny enough to be a PhD topic. And God bless them, they think they're getting everything else out. I'm sorry. I think they're getting everything else out of the way. And Jonas Salk, if he hadn't been willing to just zero in on polio, there would have been a lot more sick kids. But for Renaissance souls, choosing feels like losing. We feel like, if somebody asks me what's my favorite color, I immediately think of all the colors I'm giving up. Well, what do you mean, for my kitchen, for my car, at Christmas time? If I say purple, then what about teal? And we just can't stand it. It's like if I came to you to be a physical coach instead of a life coach. And I said, how would you like it if I worked on your right arm? Well, you start on my right arm, and you get to my left arm and my legs, that's great. But if you start getting so interested in every single capillary of my right arm, I say, wait a minute, there's more to me than that. Don't give up on the rest of me. So we really need to widen our options rather than narrowing our choices. If you think of the ducks as sort of the upside down triangle, where the little dialogue things at the bottom, liberal arts at the top. We're more like a tree. Each of us have our own particular trunk, but then our branches, some go to the sun this way, some intertwine, some come at it another way. It's a very different image. And as a result, the way we go about designing our life is to knock on a door, go in, get to know about what the conferences are, the interesting topics, or what are the books, and another door, and another door. So that's how we work. One thing leads us to another thing that leads us to another thing. Okay, now, the other part of our process, the second characteristic, is really true for everybody, but it is far more true. I mean, I coach people across the spectrum. Mozart doesn't come to me to figure out what he should be when he grows up, but he comes to me to figure out if he should move to Vienna and how much he should charge for a minuet, you know, those kinds of things. So, but I have seen this in all clients, but so much more in my Renaissance soul clients, and that is that we need to correlate our energy pattern to our activity. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's imagine I have a duck insurance salesman client, or Mozart insurance salesman client. He tells me Thursday morning, he's going to write down Thursday morning from 9 to 12, he's going to be doing cold calling. I can just about bet money that if I dropped in at his office unannounced on Thursday morning, he would be doing cold calling. I have a Renaissance soul who may also want to be doing cold calling. She may even write it down. And on Thursday morning, if she wakes up with that part of her energy present, she'll be the world's most dynamite cold caller. But if a different part of her energy is present, she'll be doing anything but. Designing a new product, cleaning the rug, walking the dog. We really need to correlate what we're doing with our energy. Okay, so, and the final characteristic, the third characteristic, is the outcome of this process. And that is our definition of success. Renaissance souls define success really differently. And I'll give two little vivid examples that will probably stick in your mind better than my just saying an explanation. Picture again a duck who Mozart owns a restaurant. And he's got it all figured out. He's got his fair trade coffee, he's got his organic juices, he's got his community art, he's got wonderful music, it's lovely, he recycles, everything is just great. And what does he do? He'll say, okay, well, if I started this in Concord, then maybe I'll do another one in Lexington, and then I might try doing one in Gloucester, and he'll expand, and he may even franchise, and every single one will look exactly the same. Because when the Mozarts find something good, they write it. That they're just happy to stay with that. On the other hand, if I have a Renaissance soul who has a restaurant all fixed up, you know, the organic, blah, 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 and it's really going well, and it's got it all figured out, what's this person going to do? Sell it. Renaissance souls, once we figured out what it was that intrigued us about something, what we've learned, what we wanted to learn, we're done. We're bored. Been there, done that. So the difference becomes, if you think, how many of you here have had the experience of having crafts projects you didn't finish? Closets, basements, etc. Okay. Remember those potholder kits? They had 4 metal sides. They came from the 5 and 10. They had the yarn in the bag. Okay. Let's imagine 2 kids. One kid, more like Mozart, saves up his allowance, goes to the store, buys this potholder kit, comes home, gets his mom to set up the sides, sits there, does the yarn, gets all done, has a potholder, and is pleased as punch. Because that's exactly what he paid his money to get, was a potholder. Now we've got our Renaissance soul little kid. She saves up her money, she goes to the store, she brings home the kit. She doesn't let her mother touch it because half the fun is figuring out how to make the sides work. Once she's got the sides set up, she may do a quarter or at most a half until she has the design figured out, and then she stops. And she is equally happy because she didn't pay to get a potholder. She paid for the chance of learning a new process. And so Renaissance souls have to recognize that a lot of those projects where people are saying, how can you go out and be buying a stained glass kit when you haven't even finished with that embroidery thing that you just bought a couple of months ago? Our definition of finished can be quite different from Mozart's definition of finished. And just so you don't feel too bad about it, Leonardo da Vinci, who's one of the classic Renaissance souls, never finished the Last Supper. So it happens to the best of us. Okay, so now Renaissance souls are not, there's several things they don't need to be confused with. First of all, you don't have to be a genius to be a Renaissance soul. I don't know how many people come up to me and say, Margaret, that's all very well and good, but I'm not a Ben Franklin, I'm not an Oprah, and how am I going to make a living? I'm not a genius. Well, nor is it any fair to say that anybody who's like Mozart has to be a child prodigy. Those are the extremes. This is the continuum. We do not have to be a genius in order to be like Mozart or like Ben Franklin. Also, there's some people who rush around being busy all the time, and it looks like they're doing a million things, and they're doing it for a psychologically different reason, in that they may have had abuse in their childhood or been through the Holocaust or something, and they want to stay busy to keep painful memories from coming up. Frequently, that person may look like a Renaissance soul for years, and then when they have good therapy or do the work, they may turn out to be more of a duck, because they were doing all those things for a different reason. Also, I often get asked, aren't Renaissance souls really people with ADHD? Aren't we all really just sick? You know, this is our pathology, we got to go to the doctor, we got to get our medicine. Well, ADHD is a disease. It's a neurological condition. It does respond to medicine if that's what you have. But it doesn't correlate in any way with whether or not you're a Renaissance soul or a Mozart, a Swan or a Mozart, whichever. And the ultimate proof of that, I was just so tickled to find this, in Driven to Distraction, which was the first Bible, really, of ADHD, there's an entire paragraph devoted to showing that Mozart had ADHD. So anybody can have it if they have that neurological disease, but just because you have a lot of interests does not mean you're ill. Okay? So, now, how do we go about arranging our lives? This is where the time question comes in. This is really some of the most pivotal things, and this is where it's going to overlap with the whole question of retirement the most. And that is, here, let me use the ice cream example you like so much. Let's imagine that we've got 100 flavors of ice cream up there. Okay, now let's imagine we've got a Renaissance soul. If I ask any Renaissance soul, John, if you had to pick one flavor of ice cream and only one flavor, and it was the only flavor you're ever going to be able to eat for the rest of your life, and it can't be chocolate or coffee, most Renaissance souls would know that they would freeze on the spot. The thought of having to pick one and have it forever, the store would close and they wouldn't have had anything to eat. That's pretty obvious to Renaissance souls. But the other extreme of looking up at the 100, if I stated, but John, now you have to take into account all the regular ice creams and all the soft ice creams and all the non-fat yogurts and all the sugar-free yogurts and all the sorbets and all the sherbets and all the Italian. There's 100 flavors up there. That can be equally paralyzing. If I pick raspberry, but oh, cookie dough, but oh, look up here, I forgot. And we can go around and around, worried that how could we possibly make the right choice. But if I say to a Renaissance soul, how would you feel if I asked you to go get a 4-flavor sampler and know that that's what you're going to eat today, and you're going to have those flavors, and you can come back after a while if you're dull with one of them, or you don't like how two go together, or you need a different balance, or maybe you can keep one the whole time and change some of the others. When I'm doing this in a room of 100 people, you can palpably feel everything. Ah, I could do that. That seems more reasonable. Okay, and that is the pivotal distinction between the Renaissance souls and in terms of when we talk about retirement. Choosing, when we think we have to choose that one activity, that one flavor, that puts us into scarcity thinking. Oh my God, I'm going to lose all these other things. If you can think about focusing on your 4-flavor sampler, and think about the concept of focusing helps bring more things to fruition. You actually end up with more. You come from a place of abundance. Remember when I said about knocking on the door? Oops, sorry, I'll try and do it sitting down. I'm very used to moving around. I said we would knock on a door and knock on a door. Well, if you're trying to knock on 100 doors, then it's you're barely in, you're barely in, you're barely in, you're barely in, and pretty soon you feel as scattered as everybody accuses you of being. If you can say, okay, these are the 4 things, or the 5, or the 3, there's nothing holy about 4, and I'm going to knock on these doors, you get far enough in to really know what the issues are, what's the cutting edge things that are going on, who are the people doing it, what's the history of it. And you may find something that, oh, I didn't even know about that, and that will take you this way. So if you knock down about 4 doors, you feel like you're getting a lot. If you try to knock on 100, you feel like there's not enough time, you're never going to get enough. So the pivotal thing is to think about the difference between focusing and meaning fruition, as opposed to choosing meaning losing. And that's why in the work that I do with Renaissance Souls, we really focus in on what I call 4 focal points. And again, it can be 3, it can be 5, at any given time, with the absolute knowledge that no expectation that it's going to go on forever. In fact, if people set up a focal point notebook, either on their computer or a real one, and they happen to have 4 focal points, I always say have a 5th section, and every idea that comes along that excites you, write it in the 5th section. Because when you get tired of one of these flavors, one of these flavors, you can just pull from that section. So the whole question is, and then how to integrate the money with the focal points. This will probably be the last thing I'll go into before we get to the Renaissance Soul, the retirement piece. We're taught that the way you go about life design is that you pick up an ad, you find an ad or something in the paper, and this does not apply obviously to retirement, but that has enough things in it of something you've already done that you can go on doing the same thing. The implication being, if you've been cleaning toilets for 10 years, they're going to go on cleaning toilets for 10 years. You take that job, you put your identity in that circle, and that's who you become. I'm shorthanding this. If this is a concept that interests you, you might need to use the book because I want to get to the retirement piece. The middle circle of the 3 circles, the middle, skip that. I'm used to going to be able to move around, so ignore that piece. What Renaissance Souls people need to do is we need to figure out what our focal points are first. As if we were things we love to do so much that we would pay to do. Things that we would go on doing even if we won the lottery. And once we have our focal points figured out and our identity is in our focal points, then we look for what I call a JOB, and again this isn't relevant to retirement, that we can use to move one or more of our focal points forward, as opposed to having the old kind of job where we're a swan on land and it uses us up. Okay? Now, I'm going to shorthand that because that is really basically the key issues, the identity issue. Oh, and the other identity issue for Renaissance Souls is that people keep saying they hate 2 questions the most. What do you do? And what do you plan to be doing in 5 years? Yeah. And that makes a great transition to retirement issues, because that is one of the hardest, that's one of the first questions once one's retired that one tends to feel nervous about. Your friend asks you, what do you do? And you no longer have the answer you've been using for the last 5 or 10 years. If you can switch your identity to your focal points, to your passions that you would do even if you have to pay to do them, then you answer from that question. And the best conversations that you can have with people are you tell them about something you're excited about, and then you tell them something that's a hurdle, a challenge for you. Because then human beings love to give suggestions and ideas. So I could say, well, you know what? I'm just fascinated by lower Slavonian basket weavers, but I just haven't quite figured out why their hands don't wrinkle. So you know what? My brother just came back from Upper Slavovia, and you ought to talk to him. And it turns out the brother has a grant, writes a grant, and you get included, and that's how things work. But if I said, oh, I'm still working at the insurance company, that would never have happened. So answer from any one of the things that are exciting you at the moment, any one of the things that have you feeling like the swan in the water, and then say, I'm really intrigued with such and such, but what I'm trying to figure out now is, or a piece that's still fascinating me, and involve the other person in the conversation, as opposed to the dead end that I literally had. This direct quote on the side. Oh, not much. You know, I'm retired. I mean, where do I go with that? Nowhere. Okay. So, similarly, how do we choose among all the many things that interest us? If we have so many different interests, then you just know that you're going to have plenty of time and you pick 4. You can almost pick them at random. If you make sure that every ice cream flavor up there is an ice cream flavor you like, it really doesn't matter which first 4-flavor sample you have to start with. Just get started. And don't worry that you're going to have to get finished, because that finish concept comes from the ducks, and it may not fit for you. Okay? Or if you don't know what to do, you know, after you've traveled and seen your grandchildren, then there's a whole lot of different sort of brainstorming questions that I work with clients. I'll give you a couple here that you might just find fun to play with. One is, if I were taking care of all my responsibilities, I was a good spouse, I maintained my house, I kept in touch with my grandchildren, whatever the responsibilities need to be. But I could have as many clones as I wanted. What would my clones be off doing? That's a great exercise because it gets you away from the word should that you live with the whole time we're working from them. So that's an interesting thing. And in terms of the structure, of wanting to have enough structure but not wanting to be told exactly what to do at any given moment, what Renaissance souls need to do is they learn to block out focal point time that they plan to work on one of their focal points. And again, I'm not going to go into the whole thing because it'll take us too long. But so let's say tomorrow morning I've blocked off from 9 to 11 for focal point time. Each week, for me it's Sunday morning, but it varies, you make a list of the things connected to your focal points that you want to do that week. And if I'm in the mood for phone calls, I'm going to make the 2 phone calls for my first focal point, 3 phone calls for my second. I'm going to make a whole bunch of phone calls. But I'll know that I'm spending those 2 hours moving something forward that I'm excited about. If it's a gray, rainy day and I'm in the mood to be in front of the computer, I might write for the whole 2 hours and not make a single phone call. It's a way of having blocks of time so that when you wake up in the morning, you see, oh, this is Monday. On Monday, I'm going to be doing focal point time from 9 to 11, and I plan to do it again from 3 to 6. But when you get to 9 o'clock or when you get to 3, you can pick based on what you're in the mood to do, as opposed to having to do the same thing all the time. Okay? So I think at this point, how do we choose among all the things? How do we deal with the time that's ahead? The contradiction between the missing structure, wanting to have structure but not wanting to be told what to do, and how to handle the question of what do you do these days? Those are the overlapping places of the overlap. And now I would really like to open it up for questions, because I've covered an awful lot of ground in a rather rapid way, and I know people are also tired at the end of the day. So let's just move on to the question of questions. Questions?
How do you discipline yourself to do really the focal point items?
Okay.
Because it's a question of discipline.
Yes, it's definitely, nothing comes free. I would tell once you've figured out that those are your 4 for now, you really have to count that those are your 4. Because if you keep every day standing in front of the 100, you are not going to get the nourishment. And I have a whole process that once you take, remember I said that it's hard to just be convinced you've chosen the right ones, which makes it hard to do the discipline, because what if it's not even the right thing? There's a whole prism test that you put each focal point through, the prism that the light goes through for clarity. And then there are intentions and markers. So you have very concrete tasks spelled out. And since they're about things that you started out excited about, that process will help you stay with that excitement. It doesn't guarantee, if somebody really doesn't have any discipline at all, they're not going to be able to accomplish anything duck or swan. But it's easier to have discipline when you're trying to put a round peg in a round hole. If you're wired like Ben Franklin, then if you design your life like Ben Franklin, put the round peg in a round hole, it's much easier to have the discipline than if you have the added friction of trying to put a square peg in a round hole because you're trying to do something the way the Mozarts would do it. Does that answer?
So basically, I should have prioritized my activities. So I can compare them. Yes, I can write all of the things which I want to do and then compare them one to one and say which is the most important.
And by important now, remember the focal points are the things that you would do even if you're not necessarily saying that they're more important than your children or more important than doing it's. Let me just share what I stopped sharing before. There's an old Charlie King folk song. It goes, "My life is more than my work, and my work is more than my job." Okay. Now I've changed that language. I call that innermost circle the JOB. Remember, it's something that I'm going to use to move one of my focal points, which is the middle thing, your passions, forward. But then there is the life circle. And if you think like, now let's say I wanted to make a quilt. The JOB circle would give me hopefully the access to a sewing machine, or I could work at a place where I get free fabrics or whatever I needed. The middle circle is the design of the quilt. And maybe Mozart would like an all red or an all blue, but people who are more in the Ben Franklin would like some dark, some light, some pattern, some plain, in order for the quilt to be interesting. And the outside circle, the life circle, is really the room in which we're doing the quilting. And if the shades are down or if the shutters are closed, no design is going to excite us because it's too dark. So I will work with clients who will come to me, and if right now they've got an ailing mother, or their husband they're in the middle of a job transition, or they're about to, I say, right now isn't the time. Right now you've got more important things going on in your life circle. So it isn't necessarily that your focal points are the most important thing in your life, but especially when you're thinking about retirement, the focal points are the things that you thrive on doing, that you love doing once you get into them. And a wonderful image of how to get them more clearly into your life, and you may have heard this because it's not original with me, but I just love it. A professor comes into a classroom and he's got a jar with 4 rocks in it. He asks the students, is the jar full? Yeah, the 4 big rocks, yeah. And he pours in gravel. And then he asks the class, is this jar full? And they know it's a trick question at this point, so they don't answer. Then he pours in sand. And he says, now is the jar full? And they say yes, now clear. And he pours in water. Now the point is, if you put in the gravel and the sand and the water first, there will never be room for the rocks. So the life design I try to do with people who are retired, who've worked so hard for so long in order to get to this point, is to help them design their life in such a way that they get the rocks into the jar. How many of you experience? I'm going to clean my house this weekend. Well, it can take all weekend and end up messier than when you started because you pulled out the drawers and half the closets. Or you can say, oh, I'm going to so-and-so suddenly coming to dinner in 20 minutes, I've got to clean up, and you can clean up in 20 minutes. Those kinds of things expand to fill the time you give them. If you get your rocks in first, you'll get the other stuff done. Or if the life circle suddenly has something too big, then you say, okay, I need to put the rocks aside right now because this is taken over. So I will frequent clients who come to me and they'll be all set out and use the book and they're all good. And I'll say, you know what? This isn't the time for you to be taking on 4 passion points because these big things are going on out here. Yeah.
I guess, there are times in your life where it's not right. It's just not possible to take on those focal points. However, sometimes when a good part of your life is rough, if you have a time set aside for those focal points, the things that give you joy, doesn't that recharge your battery so you can take care of the difficulty over here?
And I have the way in the book is how you figure out how much time you have for focal points, given the other things in your life. We don't eliminate them. And especially females in America, where we're supposed to can take everybody else's needs into account first, and we feel totally guilty lying on our couch reading a book. Unless, the old adage, go out and play until you finish your homework. Or if you think about homework, what was homework? It was what the grown-ups, i.e. the teachers and your parents, considered important. Now we're the grown-ups. And when we're retiring, we are more the grown-ups than ever. This is our turn to decide what we need to, what are the rocks that need to go in first. And for many of us, that feels selfish. Females in America, that can feel awfully selfish. And the image I use for that is, we don't have a picture here, but picture, you're going to pour juice, you're going to pour gravy. I have a beautiful pottery pitcher at home, gorgeous, and I showed you. That pitcher won't be able to do anything. It won't be able to fill anybody's glass, it won't be able to hold flowers if it's empty. So there is nothing selfish about making sure that you fill the pitcher in order to be able to then have resources and energy and perspective to share with others. There's an amazing quote by Robert Louis Stevenson, which I just sold to, and I may not get it exactly right, but basically he says, there is no duty, and duty, we're all good on duty, that's what we're supposed to, we've learned that since childhood, so it's a good choice of words. There is no duty we so much underrate as the duty to be happy. When we feel happy, we provide we sow anonymous benefits upon the world. Now, think about it. You go to the grocery store. If the clerk at the grocery store is in a good mood and she chats with you, you leave sort of in a good mood, so you let the person in front of you, get out and get in the driveway, and that mother's relieved that somebody was nice to her, so then she doesn't yell at her kid, and it ripples. But if that person in the grocery store sort of snaps at you or is annoyed, then when you get out in the car, then you don't let that person in, and that mother's annoyed. So the more people can put the round peg in the round hole and make sure they get the rocks in the jar, the better off everyone's going to be. And if you have grandchildren, one of the best questions you can ask yourself when you're thinking, should I paint? Can I go paint? Or should I clean the floor? Think to yourself, which would you tell your grandchild was more important? And if you would tell your grandchild that the time of creativity and joy is more important, then you have got to act on that, because they will do the old phrase, they will do what you do, not what you say. So when you're starting to feel guilty, just ask yourself, if I had a grandchild faced with this choice, what would I say?
I would like you to repeat one more time the saying, my life is more than my work.
My life is more than my work, and my work is more than my job. Now in our culture, job and work became such synonyms that it almost doesn't make sense anymore, which is why I call that middle circle the JOB, i.e. something that we are using to move something that we want to accomplish forward. And work is instead of work, I put passions. And then, so there's, my life is bigger than my passions, and my passions are more important and define what my JOB is going to be. And eventually you don't need a JOB. I don't have a JOB anymore.
No.
Because I do what I love.
I do.
Yeah. Great. Yes, we saw that. And vocations are so important, and I think in some ways you'll still see books like Find Your Passion or Follow Your Bliss, but do you hear the language? Follow your bliss. The assumption you've only got one. Find your passion. Assumption you've only got one. Well, then we feel like some of my clients come and say, I don't have a passion, because they think that passion has to be, as I said, this bolt of lightning, this one thing. And when I help them see that they can be passionate about music and fascinated by birds and really intrigued with local politics and love to travel, that's fine. But there's the other subtle piece about why are we on this planet? And people will sometimes say to me, well, Margaret, does this mean, what about that sort of life purpose? What about why we're here? I went to a workshop once where I did a mission statement where we figured out our life purpose. And I'm going to tell you what my life purpose is, and then I'm going to have you try and guess when I went to the workshop, okay? I define my life purpose as increasing the amount of delight and self-love in the world. Now, did I go to that workshop when I was a young mother with twin daughters, when girls were not yet respected and I wanted them to grow up joyful? Or did I go to that workshop when I was a regional master trainer for the Commonwealth Literacy Corps and teaching people how to teach people to read? Or did I go to that workshop when I was a pioneer in the field of bed and breakfast and I was really making people feel comfortable, women feeling okay traveling at home? Or did I go to that workshop when I was starting what now is called coaching, but nobody had heard of it when I was starting it? And I really wanted to help people, feel that they had a right to a good life. Or did I go to a workshop once I figured out I wanted to make people who were more like Ben Franklin not feel like ugly ducklings? It could have been any time, because if you're a duck, your underlying purpose will show up in one thing. And if you're a swan, your underlying purpose will come up in a great variety of ways. But it won't determine one path. You will find it showing in the different, but I mean, nobody can, any resume person has a stroke when they look at how do you get from, like literacy to innkeeping to coaching? It's like, it doesn't matter. Okay? So purpose is important, but bliss, you need to remember that for Renaissance souls, we need to follow our blisses. And I tried to really cover an awful lot in an hour. I know it is more complex than that, which is why the book has 300-something pages. But I tried to hit the highlights. Well, again, I could say about 7 different things to that, because first of all, we all have that problem. When I work at home and my computer is downstairs on the kitchen sink, how many of you have the situation where I'm planning to go down to work on it's my focal point, I'm dying to do some writing, and I notice this check that really needs to go out in the mailbox. So I take the check out to the mailbox, but then I notice the plants need watering. Well, if the outdoor plants need watering, then I notice the indoor, and before you know it, the time is gone, and I haven't done, I haven't done any writing. Okay, on the other hand, how we define productive is really pivotal. I'm going to use Mozart in a different way right now. When Mozart was alive, the conditions were brutal. There was, what do you call when everybody had epidemics, plagues, the rich owned all the land. It was a terrible
Candlelight.
Right.
We had to light.
Right. Now,
dark.
nobody says, we go this way, what kind of a guy was Mozart? He didn't come and work in any soup kitchens. He sat around writing minuets for rich people to dance to. What an unproductive thing to do. But how many frontline workers over the centuries have been able to stay at what they're doing because between work and home, they can listen to some Mozart. So the definition of productive is very important, and that's where the rocks come in. And that's where figuring out what your other responsibilities are before you decide how much time you're going to spend on your focal points. Then if you're trying to get to your desk, you'll know if it's focal point time, it's time to read. And you'll know you'll have left enough time for the desk. If you say, I've got to finish my desk before I read, if your desk is anything like my desk, it can take you the next 6 years, and you won't get to open a book. Okay, other comments?
Yeah, but if you're a Renaissance soul, you do where your energy is. If it's in the morning, not there, you don't do it.
Exactly, that's what I said. That's the second characteristic.
Yeah.
And that's why.
That's me.
I coach writers. It's one of the many different things I do. So many books on writing say you have to write every morning. The only thing Renaissance souls do every day is breathe. If that's the definition, if that's how somebody feels they're going to have to do to be a writer, they'll give up on the writing.
Yeah, takes the fun away.
Right, and it isn't how we work. This book would never have happened if somebody told me I had to do it every morning. Morning isn't my best time for creative thinking. Any other comments, questions?
it easy, do you think, to motivate a Renaissance soul, to encourage them that it's okay that you dabble in all these things when they haven't kind of accepted it yet?
Okay, well,
When
first of all,
they're feeling like the failure, is
If
it
they're-
easy to,
if you're feeling like the failure, the first thing you want to do is you don't want to tell them it's okay to dabble,
okay.
because they're not dabbling.
Right.
That shows you how ingrained it is in our language. You know, it is really deep. The second thing is it's not easy to make that switch. That's what, especially young people right now are my passion. There's a whole section in the book about young people, and I'm doing things with leadership intensives and at the different colleges, because young people have to realize that it's okay to pick some combination of things now and not feel that they're signing on for a prison sentence.
As a mother of college students, I don't know.
Well, you know, you'll be surprised. I just was asked to speak to the they had a special conference for Smith and Vassar and top Ivy League schools brought me in to speak, and the whole point that they want me to talk about was the fact that they are more and more having these integrative majors, and so they're recognizing that the old way was just designed for half the continuum. And I was strong, you should look at that chapter.
Okay.
And there's also really good quotes in there from career counselors and so on, explaining why in this culture, in this economy, my clients would come in and say, how was I ever so stupid as to put all my eggs in one basket?
Mhm.
Because Renaissance souls, we love the learning part of the curve. So if we have to change, if our boss says, well, you know, our business is changing, now I expect you to do such and such, we go, oh, good. Where somebody who's always wanted to do the same thing and likes the plateau is far more likely to sink than swim. This is a time of change. This is a time people, they'll ask you, have you been to other countries? Because this is international. Renaissance souls love to go to other cultures. If we have any ear at all for languages, we love learning languages. You might not want to just sit and watch the play. They might also want to see the lighting. Or they might want to go backstage and see how the scenery's done. You know, to broaden your definition of what is interesting to a kid. Rather than assuming that theater is